friends, welcome back to Food Prep Guide. We're going to have a little pantry chat today about baking powder. If you do any type of baking at home, this video is going to be for you. The question is, can we actually store baking powder long term? And by long term, when it comes to this, I'm talking about more than 6 months. The answer might surprise you. I'm also going to share a quick test that you can do to see if your baking powder is still active, is still going to work. Just like yeast, it can essentially go flat or die in the sense that it's not going to give your baked goods the lift that you need that baking powder is known for. I'm also going to share some tips for how you can make baking powder yourself so that you can store it extra long term. We'll be right back.
By the way, if you would like help building your food storage, scroll down to the description box of this video and click this link for our free 1-year food storage plan. We calculated a year's supply of food for one person, then broke that data down into a week-by-week list of items to build your pantry on a budget. We'll send it straight to your inbox. If you're new here, we invite you to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss all of our upcoming food preservation, pantry storage, and gardening tutorials. Now back to the kitchen.
Let's start by discussing the two enemies, I guess we could say, of baking powder storage, and that is heat and moisture. So both heat and moisture are actually what activates baking powder and makes it bubble up and create that leavening type of agent in our baked goods. Unfortunately, it's not just direct heat and moisture, but it can just be the residual heat and moisture in the air. I live in the hot, humid South, so humidity is a big issue for me. And when I first started kind of transitioning to a 1-year pantry and even like a 2-year type pantry, I bought a big size bulk container of baking powder because I did not know. I just thought it's a powder, it's shelf stable, and I should be able to just buy a big canister of it and have it for 2 years. But that is not the case. It can go bad, or I guess not be active, kind of like yeast can. So the general shelf life of baking powder just in the canister that you buy from the store is about 6 months. You might be able to squeak about 12 months out of it, but you can only rely on 6 months. So buying that big canister was a mistake for me early on, and I just didn't know about it. So what I did was I started researching how can I take that big canister and salvage it, basically, because there was no way I was going to go through that in 6 months, not even a year. I mean, I do a lot of baking, but you all know with baking powder, if you're familiar with baking, you only need about a teaspoon here and there, or 2 teaspoons here and there. It's not a large amount. So those canisters last a long time. What I've found, like if you go to Google right now and type in how to store baking powder, something that you're going to see over and over again is do not vacuum seal it. But they don't tell me why. So then I started researching why. Does baking powder need like a constant oxygen source in order to stay active or to not go flat? And that doesn't appear to be the case. So my curiosity got the better of me, and what I did was I went ahead, because no one told me why I couldn't vacuum seal it, and from everything I understand, vacuum sealing it would make it last so much longer. I couldn't find anything that talked about baking powder needing oxygen to continue to activate. So what I did was I took that big canister. This is in January of 2022. It is now January 2024, so this thing is almost exactly 2 years old. And remember, standard shelf life is 6 months, maybe a year if you're lucky. So this thing is 2 years old, and what we're going to do is we are going to test it together here on camera, and we're going to find out, is it true that you can't vacuum seal baking powder? I don't know. I haven't done this test yet. I'm doing this test in real time. So we already talked about how heat and moisture activate baking powder. So to test baking powder, we just need hot water. So what I'm going to do is pour a little bit, about a half a teaspoon here. You see these, you see these little coffee liners here. Sometimes I use muffin cupcake liners, and sometimes I just use a coffee filter, fold it over and put it in the jar, and that is going to help me get a vacuum seal, because with powdered goods, a lot of times when you're doing a vacuum seal, whether it's a hand pump or a machine, that powder just gets suctioned up into the lid and just prevents you from getting that good seal. But you can hold that powder down with a coffee filter or a cupcake liner and get a good seal. So just a tip for you. So here is half a teaspoon of baking powder. Let me turn my tap water on hot real quick and get that heating up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pour just a little bit of hot water in here, and I'm going to hold it up to the camera. And what we need to look for, if it's still active, if you have ever taken baking soda and poured vinegar on it and you saw it fizz up and bubble, kind of like they use for like the volcano experiments in science class, or like we use in cleaning all the time. I mix vinegar and baking soda all the time to clean off really grimy things that I just can't get off regularly. It works fantastic. But it does the same thing with baking powder when it reacts with hot water, heat and water. So we should see some fizzy, bubbly action just like we would if we were to pour vinegar on baking soda. Okay, the water is hot, so I'm just gonna get some water in on here real quick, hot water. Here we go. Do you hear that? Put it up to my microphone. Look at that, all that fizzing. You hear that? I hope my mic is picking that up. This stuff is fizzing like crazy, y'all. That is 2 years old. Who says you can't vacuum seal baking powder? I'm vacuum sealing baking powder. Look at that. Still fizzing. So, okay, we've answered that question. You absolutely can store baking powder. I got a big canister of that 2 years ago. I put it in all these half-pint jars because once you open it, now, I have my brake bleeder pump, and it's not a big deal for me to go ahead and seal it up in between uses, but a lot of times when I open up a jar, I'm not vacuum sealing it again in between uses. So once you open up a jar, you need to use it in about 6 months. So that's why I store them, I package them in these half-pint jars. I have some quarter-pint jars, and I might even consider storing it in quarter-pint jars. Just now that I know for sure that this 2-year-old baking powder, the life was extended extensively with vacuum sealing it, I might even do that because, like I said, once you open it, you only get a few months out of it before it starts going flat. And just using such a small amount, like 1 teaspoon per recipe, it just doesn't go fast. So, awesome. Okay, so let's pretend that we did this test and it failed. Let's pretend it didn't fizz, it didn't bubble up. What could we do then? We need to make our quick banana bread. We need baking powder right now. What do? You can actually make baking powder yourself at home, and here's how. You need baking soda and cream of tartar. Tartar? Is it tartar or tartar? I'm not sure. Baking powder, baking soda, and cream of tartar. So the ratio is 2 parts cream of tartar, 1 part baking soda. Now typically when I'm making baking powder, I only need to use about a teaspoon or like 1.5 teaspoons. So I have found that the ratio I use most often is going to be this half teaspoon amount, and I would use half a teaspoon of baking soda and 2 half teaspoons or 1 teaspoon of cream of tartar. Mix that together, use it in your recipe. It's going to act exactly like baking powder. Now I know if you're like me, you like to simplify your pantry inventory. And if this has multiple purposes, why would I also buy baking powder? Why wouldn't I just stock baking soda since I already stock it for our cleaning products? Why wouldn't I just buy, a bigger jar of this and make it myself at home? So here's the issue with that. You can make it yourself at home in a large quantity. Like you could do this ratio that I just showed you and store it in a quart jar or a pint-sized jar, but you're going to need to add a starch to it. A lot of people use cornstarch. We don't use cornstarch in our family. We use arrowroot powder. So you can use cornstarch or arrowroot powder, and it would be that would be 1 part in your ratio. So let's say you want to make it yourself at home. You want to make a big batch of it. You would do 2 parts cream of tartar, 1 part baking soda, 1 part starch. Mix that all together, and then you're able to store it on your shelf for a very long time. The reason why is because that starch, from what I understand, helps the baking powder and the cream of tartar to not react with each other. That's what I understand. But I haven't stored it, I haven't made it myself and stored it stored it long term. I have ran out of baking powder before and had to do this 2-to-1 ratio baking soda and cream of tartar and baking soda. But just so you know, I didn't want anybody to go and make their own big batch quart-sized jar and then not know to put the cornstarch in it, because Once you mix the baking soda and the cream of tartar together, you need to use it in your recipe right then. So that's why I usually just use a half a teaspoon. Half a teaspoon of baking soda and 1 teaspoon of cream of tartar will give me 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. So before that test, I was highly considering switching to getting 1 big bottle of cream of tartar because we already stock baking soda in these big 4-pound packages. We generally keep 20 pounds of baking soda on hand, and that's because of how heavily we use it in cleaning in addition to baking. So it's multi-purpose. But now that I see that test and see that baking powder, I got 2 years out of it, and who knows how long I could have gone. You know, I vacuum sealed it. What if we did this test 3 years from now and 4 years from now, where it was vacuum sealed the moment I got it from the store? I immediately put it in these half-pint jars, vacuum sealed it. Who's to say it wouldn't last 3 years, 4 years, 5 years? So I don't know that I'm going to switch. I don't think I'm going to make that switch. I think I would rather just go ahead and buy a bulk, continue doing what I have been doing, which is basically buy a bulk size canister. They're not that bulk. They're only, I don't know the ounces on it, but they're only about that big, and that lasts me 2 years. So I think I'm just going to keep doing that and vacuum seal it. But if you run out, you can always make your own with that little tip I just shared. I hope that was helpful to you all, and we will see you next time. Bye.